Hey, what's up guys, aarava here and welcome back to my Let's Talk F1 series here today for the 2019 Mercedes Challenger, the Mercedes W10, and what a car this looks like. From a purely looks point of view, I think this car looks really neat. Not too different from the previous Mercedes liveries, of course. It is still going to be a silver arrow with the turquoise of Petronas, but they've changed it subtly in many places, especially on the rear end there on the engine cover, and it looks really good, especially on track versus the studio photos. It looks even better on track in the sunlight of Silverstone when they shake down earlier today. It looks really good, and it looks definitely mean aerodynamically as well, especially in the mid area around the bargeboards and the end plates of the side pods. So let's try and analyze it aerodynamically and have a look at what's what for the new 2019 Mercedes Challenger. That's obviously trying to defend its championship from last year. So we're going to start off with the front end here on the Mercedes car. So the front wing itself is a little more curved than we've seen on a few other teams. Obviously we saw Renault with the video I made yesterday. They opted for a huge main plane on the front wing and then kind of curved the rest of the flaps a little bit more aggressively, whereas we've seen the teams like Toro Rosso and Haas go for a bit more of a straighten edge front wing arrangement. So Mercedes gone for a bit more of a curved effect on the inside face of the front wing, and they've retained their snow plow on the nose cone here. It kind of highlighted in yellow the outline on the right hand side, so this kind of snow plow or cape, if you will, on the front end, basically scooping up air from the front end that goes through this part of the car and trying to feed it directly to the rest of the car as we get to the kind of midriff area, I guess you could say. So let's get into that. You can see a lot of yellow lines, a lot to go through there. The Mercedes car definitely is probably one of the more complex cars we've seen so far from the launches. So straight around the top of the chassis, they've retained the S-duct, obviously, just about under the 44, which they've decided to kind of paint in grey this time as a bit of a difference from the livery. And then they've actually got a very interesting sort of shape here to the top of the chassis, where you can see it on the kind of shading here. The actual middle part of the chassis is raised, and then the kind of edges are actually lower than the rest of the chassis, which is odd because usually actually the way a lot of teams go about it is they raise the edges and they have the inside of the chassis a little bit deeper almost. There's a bit of a kind of almost like a bit of a deep dish kind of thing going on, but Mercedes have kind of lowered the first part of the chassis and created this kind of bump to go along with the S-duct, I guess, in a way, and maybe deflect some air a little bit more left and right to either side of the chassis towards where they want it to go for the bargeboard area. But just a bit of an interesting way to go about it. And then looking at this light, it looks like it kind of gets raised up again. So intriguing way they've gone about that chassis. They've retained that kind of, you know, sleeked out kind of shape they've got, where it comes out from the wider part and gets sleeker towards the nose cone. But then looking towards the actual bargeboard area and the middle of the car, first of all, let's just get this over and done with the suspension arms. They've retained their higher suspension arms here. So something that Toro Rosso didn't do, they kind of reverted back to a more conventional style, but Mercedes have continued on with their raised suspension arms in the way that it connects with this very nice little bit to the brake duct instead of actually conjoining straight into this housing there. So Mercedes opting for staying with that and having a very high placement of the suspension arms into the chassis. I imagine also this bump would probably be there a little bit to house the kind of springs they have that connect the suspension arm. But then we get to the side pods and the actual bargeboard area. So very intricate bargeboard areas, obviously a little bit lower because of the regulations and a little bit more actually forward-facing due to the regulations of where you're allowed to place these bargeboards and all the appendages that come with it. But they've got a very nice connecting piece now that connects from the chassis into the actual arrangement of the bargeboard, a la kind of like what McLaren had last year in a way. And then they've got the usual numerous kind of daggers in terms of bargeboard arrangements coming through here on the right-hand side, and then circling through the kind of slots they've got on the floor, which I imagine that'll be a kind of area, again, they'll be developing quite a fair bit and might actually change in pre-season. And it's Australia. We saw last year Ferrari starting a lot of work on slotted floors. Toro Rosso now launched their car with a slotted floor, so I would not be surprised if Mercedes try and look into that a little bit more. Right now, they've kind of got two separate areas of the floor which they're developing. And then we move on to the actual end plates of the side pods and the side pod inlet themselves. So Mercedes have gone for a bit more of a conventional side pod inlet. You know, a lot of the teams so far that have launched this year have gone for very thin, high up side pod inlets and really squeeze the inlets in to try and get a lot of open space for the air to flow through. But Mercedes gone for a very conventional, kind of more open plan shape. But saying that, the actual shape of the side pod compared to last year has actually shrunk and got neater a little bit. Not a huge amount, not a crazy amount like we saw Red Bull last year, but still a decent amount has kind of tucked in and shaped in a bit. So Mercedes still have tried to aerodynamically try and get that area a little bit neater, but the actual inlet itself is still quite a conventional shape, and and actually has got a little bit deeper in terms of lengthways downwards compared to what they had last year. So they've gone for a bit of a different styling and treatment to last year, and obviously they should do, because they've changed the actual arrangement and how they've gone about the end plates on the side pods themselves. They've gone for a bit of a almost not a Ferrari style, but a Ferrari kind of concept of having this kind of double hold arrangement of the inlet, and then they kind of got an open hole here of where the air is going to pass through. But 1, 2, 3 elements effectively that can affect the airflow a little bit and try and encourage some mixing as it goes down towards the end of the car. And then with the mirrors, a lot like a lot of teams here, they've gone with a two-pronged attachment approach of you've got one little attachment here, which is awkward to see because of the angle of the photo, but one attachment here on the bottom of the mirror, and then the side of the mirror connects all the way on and outstretches to the chassis. And in doing so, they are within the regulations of the rules, but at the same time, they're using it as a bit of a vortex generator and as a bit of an aerodynamic active device here going across the top face of the sidepod to conjoin with the kind of already across face they've already got from this overbearing bit of metalwork there. And then like we've seen with Renault and Haas, they've had to lower what they'd already had from last year, which you can see here. You'll see from a better angle, obviously, from the side-on view, but very much the same sort of bargeboard arrangement as they had from last year, but they've had to lower it and kind of chop it off a bit because the rules this year dictate you can't have too much going on this kind of top height area of the car. And then we move on to the rear end, and from this angle you can see a very long, wide T-wing with downward end plates there to try and create some vortexes on the rear end, and a bit of a long T-wing there. So the only team so far that's launched with a kind of noticeable T-wing, if you will, on the rear end just above where the exhaust will be, trying to help in with that effect of the washing of the exhaust gases underneath the rear wing and affecting that entire area, interacting with the top and the downward face where the diffuser would be of the rear end. Right, so we look onto a side view now. Now you can get a bit of a better idea of what I was going on about the actual side pod kind of end plates and the bargeboard area. So you can see this is a very similar style to what Mercedes had, although you can clearly see where they've had to cut it off effectively, and instead they've now got a bit of a wingler on the chassis side. They've actually gone for a bit of a shorter wingler. Actually, last year and the last 2 years, Mercedes have opted for this huge wing, but I guess the regulations now have some restrictions on maybe where the winglet can be in terms of how long and how high it can be. So they've gone for a bit of a smaller one that is just trying to get some air from the top end, just try and channel it towards either just underneath the sidepod inlet, also a bit would be channeled into the sidepod inlet itself, but more so through the middle, then through the hole towards the end, towards the kind of middle part of the car, and then eventually also trying to attach through to the sidepod and go towards the end of the car where the diffuser would be. But they've got this arrangement, like I mentioned, the kind of wing attaching from the actual chassis itself and blending into a bit of a bargeboard element. And then it's very dark to see here, but I imagine there's a few cuts over here because from the top-down view, definitely looked like there's a lot going on this middle part here. All very intricate work, all trying to feed it downstream of the car or also to the underneath of the car where a lot of work gets done aerodynamically on the end. But you can see here from this angle, once again, the mirrors, the two-pronged attachment. So this is the front-facing attachment that you saw going along across the car from the side to the chassis, and then this is the one that you can't see quite well from the front view, but quite a long streak. And again, that'll be to affect aerodynamics actively. The way it's kind of connected on to the rest of the bargeboard sidepod end plate area is just purely for aerodynamics, but well within the rules. You've seen other teams do it so far on the car, and Mercedes no different there in that kind of way. But we move to the rear end there, and Mercedes this time opting for a bit of a Haas kind of way of approaching the rear wing in terms of attaching it to the car. They've gone with these two overbearing curved arms instead of just kind of one that they've gone for in the past, or just kind of more simple solution of attaching the rear wing to the car. So Mercedes going for that finally as a solution. And you can see just here, I haven't highlighted that actually, but you can just see there a connection to the T-wing, and actually a tiny little, very simple monkey seat actually they've gone for. So they've kind of gone for a double layer, tiny little simple monkey seat, and then a T-wing as well. And then the rear wing itself, Mercedes gone for that overhanging style, McLaren Ferrari style rear wing there with these two little cut-ins there, and then also a bit of a warped shape on the rear wing as well. You can see a little bit with the shadow work there on the rear wing, but a very nice sculpted rear wing, trying to cut some drag and also bleed some air through from either side of the rear wing. Comes in handy when they need to try and get some air efficiency on the rear end. We look at another side-on view, but a bit of a different angle. This time I'm trying to highlight also the kind of different shape shape of the Mercedes Sidepods there. And so, like I said, they have neated it up somewhat compared to last year. Last year was a little bit wider, especially on this front end, so they have kind of tucked it in a little bit. And then again, from this angle, with a bit of a lightened up view on Photoshop, you can see the intricate work of the bargeboard area a little bit more in terms of what's going on for the Mercedes car. And then again, a different angle. This time you can actually see both arms extending. So you've got one arm extending from the mirror from the side, and then from the bottom there, you've got another arm extending to the chassis there. And then from this view, you can see the kind of connection point they've got for the monkey seat and the T-wing. Actually, this in itself isn't even a part of the monkey seat. It's just a bit of an interesting bodywork there from the Mercedes car. So I'm wondering what they're doing there. Probably it's facing downwards, so maybe trying to collect some air as it swoops through down from the engine cover and trying to get that towards the monkey seat that they've got and the T-wing. And again, a bit of a better look at the rear wing with these two cutlets, and then they've got the usual streaks here trying to bleed air down towards the diffuser. And then here, I haven't highlighted it, but on the rear end, you can see all these tiny little ridges. So Mercedes have still got this kind of controversial rear wheel design that they had at the end of last year, which Ferrari kind of questioned a little bit, and they actually blocked up just for the sake of blocking it up at the end of last year. So they're still going for this slightly controversial design on the rear wheel. So we'll see how that develops, and if there's going to be any challenges maybe from Ferrari or any changes from the FIA in terms of the technical directive, but remains to be seen. But for now, it looks like on the renderings, they are going for that still on the rear end hub. And finally, we move to a diagonal view then of the car. Again, you can see the kind of snowplow highlighted. Never actually missed off one of the corners here, because it actually has a very unique kind of forward-facing edge, actually, and then kind of curves back. But that snowplow, or a cape, if you will, like I said, taking air from the front, essentially. You can see directly with the arrow here, just scooping it towards already the suspension arms, and then directly where the bargeboard area is. So they've stuck with that. I would be surprised if other teams don't have similar things. Obviously, McLaren had one after the Spanish Grand Prix last year, and Williams rocked up with one at the end of pre-season testing last year. So I would think a lot of teams would go for that. Again, highlighting that heightened suspension that looks very, very unique to the Mercedes car this year, with Toro Rosso opting to drop that concept there for some reason. I don't know, maybe they dropped it only for the simple renderings and will have it for pre-season testing. But Mercedes so far the only team that have opted for this very unique solution to that area of the suspension. And then again, just highlighting the intricate work that's going on in the middle. And again, this one is a really nice angle of the Mercedes mirror approach now. So you've got this one arm curving through there, and then another connecting through to this overhang that goes across from the end plate across the side pod, and all of this trying to mix them out at the top of the side pod. That mixing is going to energize the boundary layer on the top of the side pod and try and keep the air attached as much as it can as it goes towards the end. And this angle itself also again shows off that despite having a bit of a larger bore inlets for the side pod, they have suckered in those side pods even more from last year. You can see clearly with the geometry, the way the side pod kind of tapers in there with that Coke bottle shape, really nicely shown here on the Mercedes car. And then, like I said, the 1, 2, 3 overhangs connecting into the side pod there, trying to affect the air and kind of curve it and flow control it as it goes down towards the rear end. And finally, towards the rear end of the car, finally an angle where you can see the T-wing here, but then here is a slightly very, very simple monkey seat just ahead above the exhaust. And then here, a nice look at the two-pronged attachment, two-armed attachment on the rear wing solution this time round for Mercedes. And then the rear wing from this angle looks even more aggressive than the side profiles here, because you've got the two overhanging bits that have been the style, like I said, of McLaren and Ferrari, and a few teams so far have launched with it, with the Haas and the Toro Rosso, I believe, was it? And then the usual streaks down here, trying to bleed air from the top here down towards the diffuser area, trying to get that area of the car working as efficient as possible. Mercedes have talked about, they've done a lot of work apparently on this year's car of trying to get the rear tyres to work a little bit better, because obviously last year that was an issue, that their rear tyre wear and rear tyre performance was a little bit lacking at a few circuits here and there. So they worked a lot on the rear end of trying to solve that. And then also we've heard a lot about the engine itself. They've done a lot of reworking to make it as efficient as possible. So away from an aerodynamic standpoint, engine performance-wise, they've worked a lot apparently, because the teams are allowed an extra 10 kg of fuel, but Mercedes have said that if they can get away with not running that 10 kg, do a little bit of lift and coasting, but still have a very efficient engine, they'd rather go for that, because obviously a lighter car at the start is going to gain you a few tenths here and there per lap, and that's quite a lot in Formula 1, of course. So they've also worked a lot on the engine. So I don't know, if from the way they sound, the confidence levels, and how good this car is looking in terms of aerodynamically, aggressively in the middle part of the car, and also the rear end, I think, you know, Mercedes have got another great car on them, and we're going to hope that Ferrari and Red Bull come out swinging with their designs. Obviously, Red Bull will launch later, so if you are new around here, do get subscribed. I will have a video for the new Red Bull Honda car later today when it launches. I will have a video for that, so do get subscribed. But guys, if you have enjoyed this video, then be sure to smash that like button. Let me know what you think about the Mercedes W10. Visually speaking, and also aerodynamically speaking to you guys, think it will be another world beater and the car to beat this year. Obviously, you would kind of suggest it would be, being obviously the reigning world champions, but obviously there's always the question of how Ferrari and Red Bull come out of the block, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, like I said, if you are new around here, do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content, guys. I will be analysing all the other cars that are launching so far. I've had a few questions of why I didn't analyse the Williams car. That's because that was purely a livery launch for Williams. Everything that Williams showed at their launch was all livery related, wasn't anything to do with the new car. So once the new car does launch at pre-season testing, I will be doing a video for that as soon as I can. But guys, if you have enjoyed this one, again, like I said, hit that like button, and I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.